So let me get this straight. VP Kamala Harris wants to talk to black men, so she donated a full hour to do so. If you don't get the hell out of here with this mess, this is this is ridiculous. What's good, y'all? Welcome back to the Onyx Report. Black Masculinist news for the day. Yeah, man, y'all know I had to hit on this real quick. This whole issue going on with Kamala Harris and how they kind of tried to sneak it in and really say something without saying anything. So let's deal with it. Now, just so you guys know where I'm getting this from, this is actually from USA Today. This particular version of the article is posted on Yahoo News. It says Democrats have a problem with black male voters. VP Kamala Harris is quietly trying to fix it. Quietly. Right. And this is very reminiscent of what we've already seen take place with Stacey Abrams, LA Mayor Karen Bass. Right. We've had these, black women political figures. And of course, I've heard the same about Chicago, but I won't even step into that quagmire. The only thing I'm pointing out here is that there's a disingenuousness, right? There's a disingenuousness, a kind of lack of an honest willingness to engage black men, right? So as soon as you tell me that a political candidate or political figure, politician sat down for 30 minutes or an hour, I already got problems. That doesn't at all suggest to me that that's a serious conversation. It really doesn't. But let's actually see what it says. So this particular article came out January 31st of this year. Reads, Washington, Biden administration appears to be paying close attention to the criticism that Democrats engage with black voters only during election cycles without delivering on the issues they care about. Vice President Kamala Harris, who is playing a crucial role in the administration's outreach, quietly met last week with students and civil rights organizers to solicit ideas on how the Biden administration can lift young black men. So there's a couple problems with that. First off, obviously she's being used by the Biden administration for the, very reason she was elected. She gives a black face without having to actually own up and pay off any promises that were extended to the black community. And for black men, that has meant generations of, using our faces, using our issues, even using our deaths when convenient, without having to actually address black male needs. See, up to now, as long as you address black community needs, especially if they were articulated by black women, that was enough. Even black men would be quiet about it, right? Even if there was nothing directly, extended to us in regard to our issues, right? That was okay, right? But we've reached a point in the last number of years where black men are finally starting to really kind of experience what I've called this black masculinist turn. They're recognizing that they're not being acknowledged, even intra-communally, even within the black community, politically and otherwise. There's no serious investment in wanting to listen to black men. The only serious investment we've seen is the exploitation of black male death for profit, and profit not extended to even the families, let alone black males in any credible way. But it's not just a financial profit. It's social currency. It's political currency. The deaths of black men provide currency, but it's a currency that everyone, except for black males themselves, can enjoy. And enjoy is not the right word, but can at least use, right? Black men can't use it. Not even black boys, which is why I use the term males. I'm talking about boys and men, and as controversial as it is, I use black females for the same reason, because I'm often talking about girls and women. But anyway, I digress. Getting back to this Kamala Harris piece. So they're sent, she's sent to to sit down with students and civil rights organizers. But she's avoiding those who have already invested a very clear idea, a very series of ideas about what black men can need. She's avoiding those. The Democratic Party is avoiding them. And we've already established this on my show when we looked at Stacey Abrams' Black Men's Agenda, which sounded very similar to the black male political agenda that's been located and publicized on my blog for the last, 3 years now? Sounded very similar. But the only thing in it, it didn't even mention her. Stacey Abrams' list didn't even mention black men other than the title. Everything promised in her Black Men's Agenda were generic Democratic promises. So she kind of took the title and, discarded anything specific we had to say. Because remember, the Black Men's Political Agenda was not written by me. It was actually, it's an open document. It's a living document where black men have contributed ideas of their own. And we'll look at that in a little bit. So why wouldn't you go to the people who are already invested in this, already studying this, even if you didn't want to talk to them directly because you don't want to give them any publicity? Because obviously, my position and a number of the other brothers I roll with are considered controversial. Why would you not at least look through the ideas that are extended? But I digress. I don't really give a damn if she did or she didn't. I'm just going to call this mess out as I see it, right? And the last point I want to bring up is the focus on young black men, right? In that paragraph, that's incredibly important. Young black men is a statement in and of itself that she's going to ignore anyone other than young black men, right? So just around voting age, but we're not going to talk about anybody older who knows the history, who knows not only about how Biden has, seriously created a context supported by, the works of Clinton to hyper incarcerate black men, but even Kamala Harris herself in San Francisco. So we have a party that is somewhat dependent on using our image, on using our deaths, had no problem with throwing us away and locking the cell, throwing away the key, the whole deal. No problem with any of that. But she needs black men. They need black men who have no historical memory. And that's the usefulness about going for young black men. You can get in their face, especially when they're college age and they're organizers, and you can make them promises. You can give them a platform, or at least give the appearance of one. You can actually avoid the historical memory of how the party has treated black men, right? That's the benefit of what she's doing. But let's continue. In the private meeting, that's another red flag. It's a private meeting, really? Attendees detail ways the White House can help young men of color improve their livelihood. See, we done already switched from black men to young men of color. Black men can't have shit. I'm telling you, as soon as we start having a conversation about black males, the question that comes up is, well, what about everybody else? Right? Everybody else got to become a part of the conversation in some way, shape, or form. But when we have these specific conversations, I don't care if it's about black women and girls, LGBT, if it's about, the disabled, then we can be specific. But as soon as it becomes about black men, it's got to be about everybody. I've even experienced this at Fresno State. We've created dynamics, created programs, created specific things to help improve the quality of life for black males who were some of the lowest represented in demographically. The immediate question even black administrators would ask first is, what about everybody else? And eventually what would happen within a year or two is this shit would become so watered down that everybody else would be represented except for the demographic we initially targeted in the first damn place. And this has happened at a couple of different places and engagements I've been involved in. But anyway, so it continues. Harris also wanted to know how the White House can assist young black men with overcoming stigmas. So now we're shifting from actually dealing with real political issues to overcoming stigmas. Attendees of the hour-long discussion with Harris, gotta love that she gave a whole hour, because she's so busy doing things that I'm sure she only had a damn hour. This is so insulting, it's ridiculous. Attendees of the hour-long discussion with Harris said the conversation continued with senior aides to the vice president after she departed. so she sat down and gave them a photo op and left her senior aides to talk to them. See, this is the Democrats' way of trying to give the impression that they give a damn by providing you symbol over substance, right? And I'm not saying this. I'm not a conservative. I'm not saying this, because I'm coming from none of that. At this point, I'm an independent. On some things, I lean left, other things, I lean right. I have no particular party affiliation. Most of my life, I've been on the left. I voted mostly Green Party for years, but in the last 5 years or so, this shit has become so sickening that I can't even engage it without damn near wanting to throw up. Anyway, they left the impression that the White House is looking to expand on its policies, they said, and improve its engagement with young men of color. I want you to notice, even in this article, how the language has shifted already, and it's gone from black men, young black men, to men of color, now young men of color. I mean, this is interesting. Within a matter of a paragraph, we've already seen really the damn near exclusion and alienation of black men. This is weird, but they're making their rounds. I mean, from what I understand, Kamala Harris spoke at Tyree Nichols' funeral. So they're, again, use of black male death, right? So they locked up these black male cops in fast fashion. And here's the thing. I'm not upset that these black men are being penalized for what they did to another black man. I am upset on how long it seems to take when it comes to white men who do this kind of thing. But I'm also upset at how quickly black politicians and figures can come out of the woodwork to stand on stage on this black man's casket and use the political currency of his death for their own advantage and leave, never to mention him again. This shit is so common, it's damn near a script that they almost don't even need to repeat. I'm surprised they just don't put a flyer up to say Kamala Harris, supports Tyree Nichols, but she showed up, apparently, I guess. Anyway, purpose of this meeting really was for them to listen, for her to listen, her team to listen, and really figure out how to dig deep and think through an intentional plan around engaging black men, particularly young black men in this country who do not see themselves in the process, but most importantly, to address their concerns and issues, said Dominic Whitehead, NAACP's National Vice President of Campaigns. Whitehead said the vice president told attendees she would listen and take back everything that you listed and figure out what is our game plan as the administration builds out a strategy attendees can be involved in. Harris and her team were adamant about keeping the more than 30 participants apprised of what they do and what they plan on doing, said Tylik McMillan, manager of the state outreach at the Credit Union National Association and a civil rights organizer. So they keep dropping these little bits of information, right? So she gave a whole hour and then she left her senior aides to talk to them. They only invited 30 black men, young black men apparently, and it was a private closed door session. I don't even really see a video clip on it, but hey, maybe there's there and I just overlooked it. But I'm just tripped out on this. So the Democrats have a problem, with securing black male votes. It's become more and more publicized in the last few years that even though it's a relatively small percentage, you have black men that started voting right as opposed to left, right? And their response to addressing this problem has been to gather 30 young black men together in a room, let the vice president sit down with them for an hour for a goddamn photo op, and then let the senior aides promise them that they'll come back to them later and tell them what they've decided based on the conversation. But you don't want to talk to anybody that has any historical or political memory about the party, about the treatment of black men, or there's nothing demonstrating here that you invited people that have a critical memory about the treatment of black males in general, about the quality of life black males lead, and who have spent years, doing the research and providing content, providing ideas, providing policy suggestions about how these black men's lives can be improved. This same thing happened to me when I first came to Fresno State. I remember, I think I'm gonna say it was my first year, maybe second at most. And I remember they invited me and two other brand new faculty into a room and asked us to come up with a program to help improve black students' experience on the campus. And the idea was there was too many black students that were checking out, right, dropping out, leaving. So they wanted us to come with it. And I found it questionable because I'm like, why are you asking me? I barely know how to find my way around the campus, and you have people that have been here for 30 years. Why are you asking me? Nevertheless, they asked us to come up with an idea that would fix all of this. And I was the first one to ask, well, what kind of funding was going to be involved? They literally said $1,000. That was the budget. So we, 3 new faculty, have to come up with an idea to improve Black students' willingness to stay on campus and complete their degrees with a budget of $1,000 a year. That's what this smacks of. That's what I sense here. You're going to literally sidestep. I mean, you got Jawanza Kunjufu, you got Tommy Curry, you got Dr. Claude Anderson, you got, there are more than enough people. And those are the public ones. You can also, there are people who've done research that get no fanfare all over the country that could have been invited in to have these discussions. This is what shows you the lack of willingness on the part of the Democratic Party to have a serious conversation about black male treatment and the role black men play in this dynamic, right? In this whole process, and even how they envision it. So it continues. The vice president shared multiple times how it was a priority for them, and they will continue to engage us, move forward as they are in the planning process of whatever they come up with or announce. McMillan said. The office of the vice president declined to comment for USA Today's story. Biden's recent outreach to black men. Oh shit, here we go. The meeting comes as President Joe Biden prepares to give his State of the Union address and possibly announce a re-election bid, and in the wake of a midterm cycle in which many black male voters said they felt abandoned by the Democratic Party. Black women vote at higher rates for the Democratic Party compared with black men. In the 2020 presidential election, 95% of black women voted for Biden, while 87% of black men voted for him, according to the Pew Research Center. Now, what's somewhat bullshit about that statement is black men may vote for the Democrats slightly less than black women, but they are still miles ahead in terms of the numbers of the percentage of votes for Democrats than any other demographic. And they're the most disenfranchised when it comes to voting. They're the most disenfranchised. When you factor in incarceration, when you factor in how ex-cons are treated in terms of the vote, which you got to look at from a state-by-state basis, with the point being, they experience voter disenfranchisement like no other group, including black women, and yet still vote to the second highest numbers. Now, I'm not celebrating that black men vote to the second highest numbers for Democrats. What I'm saying is, as they are the second highest voting group who experiences voter disenfranchisement more than any other, they still can't be credited with a modicum of respect in terms of acknowledging what their specific political needs are. And even in these articles, you have this slight kind of diss packaged in what's supposed to be a factual statement, right? Black women vote at higher rates. So it literally goes from black males felt abandoned by the Democratic Party, and rightfully so. In the very next paragraph, black women vote at higher rates, as if to suggest that black men need to shut the hell up because they're not the highest voting group. But they experience the most resistance to get their votes to the polls. And they vote more than any other group except for black women. And you would think that would lead to some type of serious reflection on what they should be able to get. And it doesn't. Right? It continues. Harris has been holding listening sessions with civil rights leaders, abortion rights activists, students, and others. I wonder if she spent more than a half hour or an hour with abortion rights activists. I'd be real curious to know that. 2 days before Harris's meeting with young black men, Biden emphasized his administration's efforts to pass federal voting rights changes in a sermon Sunday at Ebenezer Baptist Church in Atlanta. The next day at a breakfast in D.C., hosted by the National Action Network, a civil rights organization founded by the Reverend Al Sharpton, Biden spoke at length about policies his administration put in place that are intended to improve the lives of black Americans. On this one and so much, I have your back, Biden told the breakfast audience. See, this is where they subtly play with what I call flat blackness, right? They'll tell you we're concerned about black men. Then they'll say, well, we attended these civil rights, these institutions that are hallmarks of civil rights, and we attended breakfasts, we gave speeches, and we have policy that we're putting forth to help black America. That's vague as hell. And when you get down to the specifics, often none of those policies are earmarked for black men. But let's continue. New subheading that I think you should see, right? Black men in the economy. Let's see if I can enlarge this a little bit. There we go. All right. Systemic racism and inequities in the criminal justice system have long hindered black men's employment and financial security. Black men were one of the hardest hit groups economically during the COVID-19 pandemic. In June 2020, the black male unemployment rate hit 16%, while the overall unemployment rate was 11.1%, according to the U.S. Bureau of Labor Statistics. So what we know, according to the Brookings Institute, before the pandemic hit, that when it came to black men in over 35 major cities, unemployment, particularly for young black men, was between 40 and 50%. So when you see these kind of national unemployment rate statistics at 16%, it doesn't sound like much, even though it is. And it's 5% more than everybody else at their worst. But when you get into the weeds on it, it's actually much worse than that. And that was, again, before the pandemic. So what you think happened during? Because all we heard about when it came to the black community was that women lost their jobs, women were the most evicted. Nobody asked the question because nobody mentioned men. Men had lost their jobs or men didn't even have jobs in the first place. So when you add in the number of black men that lost jobs, if you connect that to how many didn't even have them, it's a much worse discussion than people really want to have. And when it comes to eviction rates and housing, again, you have to presuppose that, we're talking about black men that already had housing. Many didn't, especially if they were ex-cons. Even when they had housing vouchers, nobody would let them rent. So when we talk about who the most evicted was, we never asked the question, who are the people that couldn't get housing in the first damn place? Black men. But it's easy to sidestep around that because nobody bothered to journalistically ask the question, meaning that none of these news making agencies bothered. Let's continue. Whitehead said the vice president's office approached the NAACP, which ultimately sent more than a dozen of its members to meet with Harris, and said it wanted to speak with black men ages 18 to 35. Yeah, okay. Students from Harvard University, UCLA, and Morehouse College and organizers affiliated with the National Urban League and National Action Network also attended the meeting. So did climate activists, union workers, and people affected by hurricanes in Puerto Rico. Those who participated in the meeting said, the fuck does any of that have to do with black men? I'm just curious. What? They water down this shit so much when it comes to black men. It's ridiculous. The vice president's chief economic advisor, Deanne Millicent, was among the Harris aides who sat in on the closed-door meeting. Harris's office declined to make Millicent available for an interview. Okay, interesting. Attendees said the conversation focused on economic empowerment and opportunity for communities of color. And it touched on black entrepreneurship. Now, we've talked about this on my channel before. When it comes to black entrepreneurship, black men actually do have more entrepreneurial businesses than even black women, but there's no funding. There's no philanthropic endeavors to support that. The only ones that we've witnessed over the last 3 years have been earmarked and targeted directly for black women entrepreneurs, not black men. So it's interesting there. So I'm curious, at this session about black men, you touched on black entrepreneurship. Did you talk about the specific needs of black male entrepreneurs, or the lack of funding, or the lack of visibility for black male entrepreneurs who are entrepreneurs in larger numbers than anybody suspects, despite the lack of support they get, despite the lack of acknowledgement, despite the stereotypes that black men are lazy and refuse to do business and just want to get low-level paying jobs or be drug dealers or athletes. Those are the only kind of conversations we've heard over the last few decades. I myself didn't know that black men had more entrepreneurial businesses till just a couple years ago, because that wasn't the conversation about black males. Anyway, so they said they touched on black entrepreneurship, the racial wealth gap, disproportionately high interest rates for black borrowers, barriers to home ownership, inflated rental prices, mental health programs, criminal justice reform, and equitable access to good paying jobs. Not mad at the breakdown of the subjects. I'm just curious how those discussions went, how much data was brought to bear, and how much influence others had on the discussion. Because you didn't already told me you got everybody in there under the sun, from Puerto Rico hurricanes to climate activists. So I don't know what the hell that conversation actually meant. I don't know. Anyway, the vice president, she was very attentive in the conversation, said McMillan, a former national youth director for and senior policy advisor to Sharpton's group, it was an authentic conversation. She kept it real. Now that's interesting. So their response was that she kept it real in the 60 minutes she was there. My question is, did anybody in the audience keep it real? Were they allowed to? Did she invite the people who could? Or just conveniently those who were in a position to sit and listen and not say much? I'm curious to know. McMillan said he told the group about the need to ensure that financial institutions such as credit unions have the resources to invest in low-income communities. He said a conversation also took place about how the White House can engage young people on these issues through social media. So we've gone back to young people now. So that's where we've gone to. We went from young black males to people of color to young people. Okay. So the important points were what the White House could do in regard to social media with young people, and whether or not credit unions have resources to invest in low-income communities. I can tell you, anyway, that's already frustrating. Yeah. So it continues. Biden's promise, some of Biden and Harris's promises to empower black men have had more success than others. Legislation on increasing the minimum wage that could help close the racial, I think that was a Freudian slip. Legislation on increasing the minimum wage. They actually wrote that in the article. That was not my misreading. But I think they meant to say legislation on increasing the minimum age that could help close the racial wealth gap, for instance, is stalled in Congress. Legislation reinstating and expanding the first-time homebuyer credit is under discussion but has not been passed into law. Biden's student debt forgiveness actions have been blocked by the courts. A law Congress passed last summer that addresses gun violence did include additional money for mental health and addiction treatment, and infrastructure legislation provided some of the money Biden promised to direct to minority-owned businesses. Now we done shifted to minority-owned, right? We done shifted to minority-owned, not black male-owned. But notice when they have conversations about supporting black women and entrepreneurship, they don't play around. You don't hear women of color as much. You don't hear minorities. They are very specific to target black women because there's a social currency involved with backing black women's entrepreneurial spirit, their educational advancement, their political advancement, whatever. There's a social currency there. With black men, it's enough that you just kind of generically say it and walk away. And part of that is because black men ourselves don't require accountability when our name or our likeness is brought up. We don't require it. We don't know how to. We know how to back women. Many of us do, to no fanfare, but we don't know how to back ourselves. Part of us, we've actually bought into the idea that we just need to be bootstrappers. We don't need support. But every group that we idolize who's doing well in every area we want to focus on has had government support. We the poorest talking about we don't need any. It don't make any damn sense. But when there is some generic talk that brings us up when it comes to extending resources our way, we're the first ones to say we don't need it. So we kind of let some of this bullshit happen when they start paying, suggesting that they might do something for us. And we don't, challenge them to follow through and ask for specifics about how they want to do it. Anyway, Joshua Harris, vice president of the Baltimore NAACP, said he hopes the meeting with the vice president will lead to the administration pursuing tangible economic policies that will improve black men's lives. One example the NAACP's Harris gave is how implementation of the Inflation Reduction Act affects black men throughout the U.S. Where are the tangible jobs for someone who may only have a high school diploma, Harris said. How do we get them into those blue-collar working jobs? What does that look like? Biden administration faces pushback. Polling of black men after the 2022 midterm elections showed they still overwhelmingly approve of the Biden administration, but more work can be done. A poll in December by Hit Strategies, a public research company, found that 81% of black men approve of the job Biden is doing, but only 59% of black men said that they were satisfied with the direction in which the country is headed, and only 41% said they were dissatisfied. A poll in June by His Strategies on behalf of the NAACP found that a majority of black men trusted Democrats on issues such as voting rights, healthcare, and racial equality, but when it came to the economy and inflation, only 48 and 42% of black men trusted Democrats to do a better job than Republicans. Although black men are the second most loyal voting bloc for Democrats, political experts have cautioned that they are swing voters and cannot be taken for granted. One of the criticisms people have of general outreach to black voters is that it doesn't start until months before the election, said Jermaine House, Senior Director of Communications at Hit Strategy. W. Mondale Robinson, founder of the Black Male Voter Project and mayor of Enfield, North Carolina, was not invited to Harrison's meeting with civil rights organizers, but he said that if he were, he wouldn't have attended. Interesting. Robinson stressed that black men are not apolitical, as some experts have described them, but are exhausted with the transactional nature of election cycles. Well, transactional would presuppose that there was a return on the investment. It's not transactional. I mean, I would say it's really more no Vaseline, but you get promised and there's no, following through on those promises. Transaction would at least presuppose that there was a follow through. So anyway, people come to our communities 2-3 months before an election talking about the proverbial fried chicken, and church fans with nothing else to offer us, nothing to address the issue that's really plaguing our lives, he said. And that's real. We've talked about that numerous times. And what they've done in some presidential cycles is they'll actually come to a barbershop. When they want to target black men directly, they'll come to a barbershop or some other symbolic gesture related to, really getting down with talking to black men, and you never hear from them again. Like other organizations, Robinson stressed that black men need to see the Biden administration pass legislative policies that benefit their lives. If the Biden administration wanted to engage black men in a way that's effective, they would have started 2 years ago when they had the opportunity, when they controlled all 3 houses in Washington, D.C. They had the opportunity to do something about qualified immunity, one of the leading issues for black men. And that's one of the things on the black male political agenda as well. Qualified immunity is a legal doctrine that shields government officials from civil liability for constitutional violations. Lawmakers dropped qualified immunity from police reform negotiations in 2021. Congress ultimately walked away from talks on police reform, a setback for the Biden administration. Although participants said the issue did come up, Harris of the Baltimore NAACP said he would have liked the meetings to have included more conversation on solutions to addressing the harmful effect the criminal justice system has had on black men. When I say the criminal justice system, I'm not talking about just those who are in jail, Harris said, but the residual impact of the criminal justice system on those who are looking for jobs, on those who need housing. Just got through talking about that. Absolutely. Still, advocates said they view the meeting as a positive sign from the Biden administration. Said House to hear that the highest levels of government, the White House, are paying attention to black men in a more intentional way and understanding and doing this a year before or 2 years before the 2024 election. I think that's a really good thing for the White House to be doing. Okay. So you say, but just to remind you, this is what we got to do. This is the black male political agenda, right? It is now called the 17-point black male political agenda. And it has to do with it is produced by the 30,000 plus members of the Onyx Report right here on YouTube. And if you look closely, it was last updated January 26th, which was just a few days ago, right? So brothers are still adding in sections, adding in ideas, still happening, right? So you can see the streamlined list. There are 17 political suggestions. And each one of these, most of them, have subpoints, right? Family court reform and criminal law reform and law enforcement have the 2 highest numbers of subpoints. Family court reform has 16, criminal law reform has 12, meaning that these areas are so important that black men continue to bring in suggestion after suggestion about about other areas of those 2 major issues to address. And so for family court reform to be the number 1 point with the most number of subpoints tells you what ails black men most. But maybe I shouldn't say that. I should say it's significant. But criminal law reform clearly is a major issue, but there are others. And this is partly what I want to get across. This list is public. The link is in the description box, as I do every video, for the sources I reference. It's public for a reason, because we want people to reference it. We want people to look through it. We want people to hear the ideas, and we want people to advocate. So if you find yourself in a session where, I don't care if it's in a classroom or in a community discussion or whatever, we want you to actually use the talking points and the proposals listed in this black male political agenda so that we can actually start to generate, ideas. We can actually get some attention directed toward it so we can improve the quality of life for black men and boys. This is the way to go about it. So the 17 points are there. You can click on that and go through and look at the details surrounding each one. As you can see here, family court reform, education, affirmative action for black men, targeted homelessness programs, targeted unemployment programs, criminal law reform and law enforcement, intimate partner violence / homicide policy reform, health, targeted treatment and recognition for heart disease, cancer, suicide, and HIV campaigning, targeted small business support. So that's the entrepreneurial part we talked about. Social Security and life insurance, family support, paternity leave, reverse voter disenfranchisement, black male specific reparations, United Nations, we charge the U.S. with genocide toward black males. Title VII reform, data disaggregation, black men's rights to self-defense. These are all areas covered. And if you're interested in contributing any new suggestions, easy to do so. All you got to do is you can email me directly at Hasan@thasanjohnson.org. Right? Hasan is Hasan at thasanjohnson.org. Send me your suggestions, or you can list them in the comment section right here at the bottom of the Black Male Political Agenda. So you'll notice if you scroll to the very bottom, you see people submitting ideas there as well. So that's another way you can go about that. So that's what we're looking at. We're trying to find ways to improve the quality of life of black males. And one of the things we're finding is that as black women advance politically, often using dead black men as step stools toward that advancement, the question is there a genuine discussion about what black males need separate from the generic black community talking points? And even when there is an attempt to listen, how credible is that attempt? Is an hour sufficient to talk to a demographic who's been effectively alienated from the discussion in any critical way for generations? Does an hour suffice? With 30 young black students and no targeted effort at bringing in people who've demonstrated, right, a professional, serious investment in studying and articulating the needs of black America. Well, hey, appreciate the support. Willing to listen. Want to hear what you guys have to say in the comments section. Until then, y'all have a good one. Peace.